Okay, I think we're pretty much good to go. Good morning, everybody. I was pretty much expecting to be alone in this room, so I'm a little bit surprised. And too bad for you, because I will bore you to death with one of the most annoying subjects of all times. It's fonts, encodings, and all sorts of stuff like in that area. Before I begin, who's that guy talking here? My name is François Fernandes. I'm a so-called document technology evangelist. What a cool job title. I have no clue what it actually means. I pretty much started my career in the company that I'm working today, the Levigo Solutions GmbH, which is a German company located in the southwestern of Germany, and we do a lot of products around different document formats. And my first task for that company was actually to do a PDF rendering engine. In addition, I am the chairman of the PDF Composite Center of the PDF Association, and I'm a member of the board of the PDF Association. So, enough about me. This talk is pretty much meant to be interactive. If you have questions at any time, please don't hesitate, give me a sign, and I will try to ask you, or not ask your questions, answer your questions right away. And I pretty much love to have talks interactive in any way. So, what are we going to do today? Let's have a quick look at the outline for today. Well, that's crap. Who has ever seen a document being represented like this? Ah, yeah, okay. I was seeing two hands up, and I didn't believe that it's true. I think pretty much everyone has seen that. So, actually, that's my real agenda. So, I wanted to go through some different angles of views on that subject. First of all, something that I have been thinking. Text that cannot be that difficult. Let's see what we will see here. We will talk about the difference between font file formats and what font file formats are actually, and what a glyph is and how to get glyphs out of fonts. And the final thing for today would be at least some high-level view of how to do text extraction, because it has something in common with general font stuff, but not completely. Anyway, so let's start it right away. Text, that cannot be that difficult. Actually, when I started to do my PDF implementation, I was looking at the specification and thought, oh damn, images. These are quite complicated, all those compression algorithms. I better off start with text. That cannot be that difficult. I was proven so wrong. And everybody at our company actually laughed at me right after, because I was really expecting, who wants to join, that to be pretty much easy, because it's just text, you know? There's nothing too complicated about that. And to be honest, when I'm thinking of text and I'm talking about something that is easy, for me it's pen and paper. Not at all what we're normally talking about today. For me, all that is complicated. Having digital content involving text, involving fonts, especially PDF, but beside PDF, there are a lot of other formats out there that are quite complicated. So, just to get the whole thing started, how do we represent textual content? There's a difference between what we actually store and what we will see on screen someday or printed out somewhere. We have some kind of binary data, and we have an expected visual representation. And there are a lot of technologies involved to get from that binary data to what is visible on screen. So basically, that red arrow there's a lot of stuff hidden behind that. First of all, encoding. Who has, well, I guess everyone has heard the term encoding before? Who hasn't? Oh, that's a bad question, I know. Okay, no one. Perfect. So I'll skip all of that. No, basically, our encoding specifies on how to read or interpret the binary data that we are facing. So common known encodings are from, for example, ASCII or UTF-8 or UTF-16. All those have different meanings and have different kinds of mappings to have semantics from coming from binary data to something that is somewhere visible and readable. On the other side, we have the so-called visual representation. And this is where fonts get actually in from a visual point of view. Starting from any kind of binary data, we can have multiple visual representations depending on which font we are actually using. And if we go ahead and combine that, we get a picture like that. And it's starting to get pretty complicated because there's a lot of stuff involved. There's the encoding, there is the font, there's the font engine, etc., etc. There's a lot of technologies in the whole chain to get from something binary to something that we can actually read. So, to sum it up, technologies involved. And this is why I personally say that pen and paper is much easier. It's actually, we have ink and paper, or any kind of other material. And if we're looking at what we have as digital documents today, there's a lot of different stuff involved. We have those different document formats. We have different kinds of encodings. We have font file formats. We will get back to them in a second. We have the character bytes, the raw bytes too, where containing the data. We have the glyphs and the glyph metrics. So this is my point of view of why I say the left side is the easy one. So let's have a little closer look at how that whole process is actually being done. On the left side, we have the binary raw data, unprocessed anything. So we have on the document format side, that means it is part of the specification of the document format. I'm actually speaking about something that is like PDF. I'm not talking about text files at the moment. So we have to read the contents. We have to get to the structure of all those elements within that document. We have to decode the text content. It might be some kind of compression or any other kind of pre-processing. And then we have to do mapping from those bytes to glyphs. Glyphs are the visual representations of single letters. Then, after that, and no, it's not enough, we have to lay out those glyphs. So there's even more stuff involved. And the final thing is actually render those glyphs. And if you imagine, all those steps have to be taken for each and every character that is going to be displayed on screen. And as if you can imagine, there's a lot of things and a lot of stuff that can actually go wrong. So let's have a look what glyphs are actually. We have on the left side, we have our binary data again. And on the right side, we basically see that a glyph is, in most font formats, a collection of points with lines connecting them. So we pretty much have an outline. That means that those fonts are going to be scalable. There are bitmap fonts out there which are not that well scalable, but there are actually valid use cases to have such things. But anyway, the glyph is the visual representation for some kind of letter that we would like to see. And applied to them, we have the outlines, we have the layout data, and the so-called hinting data. Hinting is, just to have a quick side note, information if we have a uppercase T and where it's followed by a lowercase I, it might make sense to squeeze the I a little bit into the T, because otherwise it would look strange. So this is what we're calling hinting data, so that we have specialized placements of the glyphs. So that's about the quick introduction. Any questions up until this moment? And I mean to, if you have questions, please go ahead. I love to be interactive in such presentations. Good. Let's move forward. Font file formats. What are fonts? Good question. Let's sum it up as something that is a collection of glyphs. So we have a font is something that has a bunch of glyphs, typically in a similar manner contained. It's containing layout data. That means the widths of the glyph, possibly the line height, not every file format has that, and kerning. And I was totally wrong about the hinting before. Did someone notice that? Okay. Why didn't you say anything?
Because I didn't want to interrupt your flow.
Well, but if I'm wrong, you can. Okay, so let me correct that. Hinting is a set of instructions to do grid fitting of the outlines so that it is a little more beautiful on different resolutions if you have to raster it. Is that better?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Kerning is the thing that I've been describing before. So having the letter squeeze in some combinations. And of course, we have some kind of lookup information inside those fonts to get to access some kind of glyph. And yeah, usually it's something that is pretty much readable. Yeah, it is a representation of any kind of letter. Well, sometimes it's not. I love that font. It made me cry a lot of times. Yeah. So, if we're talking about fonts, on the one side, it's a general concept. Now we should talk about what are font file formats. It's pretty much the same like a document format. It's a technical description of a font, and there are some different types of font file formats out there. It's basically a digital container for the glyph outlines or bitmaps. I'm always looking at you now because I need you to correct me. And of course, some kind of encoded information about the glyph metrics, about mapping tables, so to get access to all the glyphs, and possibly naming data. You might have noticed that typically you're not choosing a file name if you're selecting something in Word to style your text. So the name of that font is actually inside that font file. And in addition, font file formats, or to be more precise, the specifications of those font file formats specify on how character codes shall be processed. So what is the most typical way from any kind of incoming bytes to something that is visible on the screen afterwards. And of course, on how the glyph instructions shall be rendered and the hitting instructions too. So, as I said, there are a lot of different font file formats out there. Just to have a little bit of a history, especially for PDF. I know there's way more different font formats. I'm not going to touch them. I just wanted to focus on PDF side, on the PDF side. First of all, and one of the most the oldest technologies is probably Type 1, and also well known. Based on PostScript, and used a lot in PostScript, has been specified by Adobe. In addition, they have a variation of the Type 1 font format, which is a bit more compact. Pretty much, Type 1 is actually a PostScript program. And this is not very compact in a lot of manners. So they specified the compact font format, which is basically a binary representation of a type 1 font. Apple, on the other side, specified what is known as TrueType. It has some other kinds of curves compared to type 1, and in addition, it has always been a full binary format. And based on that, Adobe and Microsoft both specified together OpenType. OpenType is actually an extension of TrueType into a lot of directions. For example, including raster graphics and including things like the compact font format. So you can have OpenType fonts which have their specification, including a compact font which is specified by Adobe. Lovely thing. And quite something special, because it is 100% PDF specific, is the so-called type-free font. We'll have a look at what the type-free font is in a moment. So let us compare briefly those different font file formats. As I said, type 1, it is basically PostScript based. It is actually ASCII readable to some extent. There's an encryption portion within a type 1 font which is encoded or some kind of encrypted. Well, the encryption is basically well known and specified. And the encoding is built in, so is everything inside. And the interesting thing is, and there are a lot of differences, accessing the glyphs is done by selecting the glyphs using a name. Compared to that, TrueType is selecting glyphs by a glyph ID. So in type 1, you have a kind of strings, and TrueType is all just numbers. TrueType, data type is basically completely binary. OpenType, as it is based on TrueType, it is binary. And glyph access, this is pretty much interesting. As I said, we can include CFF fonts into an OpenType font. It depends on which variant of OpenType we're actually using. So OpenType is pretty powerful, but not the easiest font format to understand. So let's have a look at the two special file formats. For me, they are special. Basically, compact font representation of type 1. So CFF really pretty compact. And again, as with type 1, glyph access is with some modifications by names. And type 3 is a so-called virtual font file, because it is actually a collection of PDF objects within a PDF document that make up the PDF, the type 1 font structure. So there's no real specification about a type 3 font file format. It's more a specification about common dictionaries, common PDF objects, on how they're going to be used to represent that font. Encoding is not built in, because the PDF document actually owns the encoding. And access, again, by names. So from there on, we know we have our input, and we have the knowledge. On the other side, there is some kind of visual representation, our glyphs. How do we get there? Basically, PDF knows, or there have been specified two ways of encodings on how those glyphs are going to be accessed. We have a simple encoding. Downside of it, it is limited to 256 characters. And I've written down that it is a relatively simple mapping, but I'm still not 100% sure whether or not that is true, because there are so many corner cases that outnumber a bit the so-called composite font complex mapping. Well, we'll get to that in a second. And for simple fonts, we can have TrueType type 1, OpenType, CFF, and type 3 as the font files being used. Now, Composite, and there's a pretty interesting concept around the composite fonts. We'll get into that in more detail later. It actually supports large character sets. As you might imagine, 256 characters, that can be problematic at some time. You don't have such limitations, well, to some extent, with the composite fonts. And when it comes to font file formats, it is limited, but it's pretty reasonable. We have TrueType as a possible so-called descendant, OpenType, and the compact font format. So let's have a look at how PDF is thinking about font mapping for simple fonts. We have the PDF string. Actually, this is basically only the raw bytes, as we've seen before. Using the implicit and base encoding, we map anything to glyph names. And beginning from that moment on, we will have a font file dependent selection on how to access those actual glyphs. So let's have a quick example. On the left side, we have a binary data. It is in the PDF hex string notation. And in the middle, we have mapped those using the PDF techniques to character names. In this case, they're pretty much readable. They don't have to. And on the right side, we have our final result. Something that is actually readable. So, implicit in base encoding, we have encoding types which are specified by the specification itself. For example, ANSI encoding is basically the code page 1225, 1250? I don't know. And there are other such predefined formats which define how bytes are mapped from raw byte values to something that has a name. Such mappings are the ANSI encoding, as it is to be seen in the example, Mac Roman encoding and Mac Expert encoding. They all have slight differences, but they are actually specified. Now, we can actually extend those encodings. We have a base encoding in this case, which is the ANSI encoding. But for some reason, probably due to the limitation of 256 possible characters, we might remap some of the character codes for our needs. So, as an example, character 39 will be the quote single, 96 will be glyph, and 128, 29, and so on will be some things that I'm not even able to pronounce. We have the possibility, using that way, to do minor tweaks to existing encodings to bend them a little bit to our needs. And actually, I've seen a lot of documents doing such kind of encodings without actually having the need. And this is why I've written down, because it is possible is not a good reason to do so. You should be pretty sure about what you're doing if you're actually writing a document. One question I'm having right now: who is of the audience making a PDF writer in some way? I know, Nitro, you do.
You mean a library? Developing a library?
Exactly. Okay, a library, printer, whatever.
Adobe, Active PDF. Anybody from those guys here?
I think we'll have a lot of them. Don't be shy. You can raise a hand. I won't ask you too much. Who's actually on the other side, having a consuming application, any kind of viewer, runner, or whatever?
I take in the stuff that you guys put out, and I see all of its warts and.
Well, I'm on the bad side too, because I have to read all that crap that people are tending to write into documents. So we should have a drink together later. Possibly 20. Okay. Wow. So sometimes it's a pain, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So to get a little bit more into detail on how the encoding is actually specified, and the PDF specification itself uses a lot of words to describe what's actually in this graph. It has been quite a challenge to distill it. So I'm not going to go through each and every line that we have within this graph. All those slides will be made available after the PDF Technical Conference, so you can easily go ahead and have a look at them. So basically, if there's no encoding specified, which is one simple example, map with a built-in encoding, it is somehow defined with the appropriate font format. Predefined encodings, as seen before, we have some kind of encoding, and this is the moment where it gets interesting. If the predefined encoding does not have a valid mapping, we have to fall back to something, and this is fallbacking to the built-in encoding somehow. And I've talked about the customized simple encoding. This is basically the so-called differences encoding. Here yet again, if we have some kind of matching within the differences, all is good, we found a target name. If not, we have to use a base encoding. If there's not a match either, we have to use the built-in encoding. So we have basically 3 stages of fallbacks. So we have a little special case here. TrueType is always special throughout the whole PDF specification. If we do not have a mapping, a valid mapping, we have to use the so-called standard encoding. It is yet another encoding which might not be referenced within a dictionary of a font, but is known to the PDF specification, and of course to a PDF reader. And if there's a mapping has been found, we actually have a target name. If not, again, using the built-in encoding. Type free? Well, obviously, as the encoding is 100% driven by the PDF structure itself, so basically a type-free font always has a differences encoding. No, it doesn't have to, but in most cases it's actually happening. But if there's no encoding specified, it is not possible to do any kind of glyph lookup. So let's look at the how to obtain glyphs for type 1 and CFF. In the stages before, we've seen that we have, in most cases, a valid mapping to some kind of glyph name. If not, our fallback is to use the built-in encoding, which is basically the encoding entry in the font itself. And hopefully we'll find anything matching and load an appropriate glyph. CFF is basically the same. There's some minor differences in how the process is going. Basically, we also have names, but then we're mapping back those names to a glyph index, because CFF is trying to be more compact, and we're storing the glyphs actually with an index. So, and now comes the fun part. As I said, TrueType is always a little bit special. We have a so-called TrueType symbolic encoding. That means if there is a specific flag set, we should use a symbolic encoding. And there's a lot of stuff to do decisions. One, we have to check whether or not that font has the CMAP 3.0, which is Microsoft Symbolic, I think. Yeah, it should be. If it has such a table, we should, or we have to map using that subtable. And the interesting thing is, we do that with trial and error, because we will do, as those tables are encoded with 2 bytes, so each and every character coming in will be prefixed with the hex values 00, F0, F1, and F2. And the first match out of that will be taken. And if it has no 3.0 subtable, Microsoft symbolic, we are supposed to use the 1.0, which is Mac Roman, I think. I'm 100% sure. But there we'll just use for a plain mapping without doing any fancy prefixing stuff at all. And if we don't have any kind of match, the outcome is not at all specified. And even better, let's have a little excerpt out of a PDF specification. If a character cannot be mapped in any of the ways described previously, a conforming reader may supply a mapping of its choosing. I personally think that this is a description for having something very stable. This is also one of the things that makes PDF processing, PDF reading, I pretty much know that you're agreeing with me, that is making it a pain. Because the reference is actually the Adobe Reader at any time. Anyone from Adobe in the room? Oh, perfect. Because I don't want to blame Adobe without any one of them being here.
I'll put it in my report.
No problem, no problem. I will have a talk with Leonard right after, so and we'll have the discussion all many
but
times.
I haven't touched the reader code base in probably 5 years. So.
Okay, well.
But just remember what TrueType, who invented TrueType, and why they invented it, before we get on Adobe too hard.
Yeah, you're probably right, but I don't see anyone from Apple here in the room at the moment. So I don't like blaming people.
They like to think different. Well, you're holding it wrong.
No, I just want to blame those people that are actually in the room. So you're allowed to blame me for anything that you like, but only if I'm here to defend myself. Yeah. No, really, Reader does a pretty amazing job in choosing fallbacks, but that means for anyone else that we have to some kind find out what kind of fallbacks Reader is actually using. And no, Adobe is not specifying them. So,
Sorry, before you go,
yeah.
you said symbolic. What is symbolic?
Symbolic, it's basically just a additional flag in the font descriptor. And the only real sense is that it specifies a different way of using the encoding. So if we have a look at here, using those high-range encodings, using the simple font format to have, for example, windings, etc., glyphs accessed, you have to use that prefixing stuff, because otherwise there's no way on getting to those high-index glyphs. So it's basically just a different kind of encoding or sense of how the encoding of a TrueType font shall be used.
I look at it as it's a way of using your regular keyboard input to map to the higher Unicode tables where all the winding characters are at.
That's actually a pretty good example, exactly. So the more common type of encoding using TrueType is the non-symbolic. And it's actually a bit more complicated than the symbolic one. We have to look for 2 different CMAP subtables, which specify those. I don't know if I have mentioned the term CMAP. A CMAP is basically just a collection of, we have incoming characters, and outgoing we have glyph IDs, so we have that mapping. And those are indexed, and you can use different CMAPs for different purposes. And here we're specified to use either the 3.1 or the 1.0 subtables. And the 3.1 is the Microsoft Unicode, and 1.0 is the Mac Roman. So if we have such a Microsoft Unicode subtable, we're mapping the glyph names to something to a Unicode value using the Adobe glyph list. It is specified. It contains a mapping from any kind of glyph name to a Unicode value. And this one is going to be, or the Unicode value will be used to look at a glyph within the appropriate CMAP. Alternatively, we have 1.0, which is using the standard Roman encoding used on macOS. That's a cool convention. Yeah?
Can I ask, when does it go from having names of glyphs to Unicode? Because obviously Chinese characters on a Unicode font, you can't imagine them.
Yeah. If you were looking into anything like the Chinese, so where you have a huge range of characters, this is typically not a simple font encoding. Why is it using glyph names? Because PostScript was always thinking like that. Right. So you have pretty much a long history of thinking about, we have binary data, we map that to strings because type 1 has strings as the glyph names. And this is kind of piggybacked to be taken over to the more modern font files like TrueType. So we have to do at that position that backmapping to something numerical.
So before OpenType, even in TrueType, you're doing that. Is that what you're saying?
We're doing that not in TrueType if you're using TrueType alone. We're doing that in combination with PDF and TrueType. So we map from character code to name, from name to Unicode value, and from Unicode value to some kind of glyph ID. This is the whole process. And here again we have some fallbacks. For example, there's the so-called post table within TrueType, which actually names the glyph IDs with PostScript names. So we can use the PostScript mapping table to do that. Okay. Composite fonts, the complex ones, tend to be the more strictly specified ones. The basic idea is we're having our PDF string, again, only raw bytes. And we're mapping those raw bytes to so-called character identifiers. It's a generic concept. It's something numerical. And from there on, we use the semantics of a font file to do the mapping and look up our glyphs. An example, we have some kind of incoming text. And in here, you might already notice that everything is double byte encoded. So basically, we have a mapping which reads 2 bytes at a time and has some kind of integer value, our character identifier. And using that, we are actually looking up that glyph in the font file. So how is that specified? A composite font, or so-called type null font, is a bit more complex description or specification. We have an encoding and we have these so-called descended fonts. That means you have a basic structure. You have your composite font, and why it's called that, I'll get back to that in a minute. And it has descended fonts, which are some kind of typically a font file associated with. Not necessarily embedded, but associated. And typically, in most cases, or in a lot of cases, let's say, predefined CMAPs are being used. And here we have another CMAP term. It is not the CMAP that is within TrueType. It is actually, again, some kind of PostScript derivative language to specify mappings from incoming characters or bytes to something that is a CID. In addition, it specifies ranges. So you can have CID map tables or CID CMAP mappings, complicated term, which combines encoding mechanisms for single, double, and triple byte values to your choice. So you can pretty much mix it up. And there are a lot of predefined CMAPs, and it's possible to create your own and embed that into the PDF document. This makes it quite powerful. And then we have the descendant fonts, which is pretty much our target. And composite, the term composite comes from the history of PostScript, because there it has been possible to combine multiple font files into one composite font, and use the mapping means to select glyphs from different fonts and so on. It is not that way in PDF. It is actually limited to be exactly one descendant font. And I hope it will never change. Oh well. I have to speed up a little bit. Okay. Good. So speedy through that. We have incoming character codes. We do map those using the encoding CMAP table. And for CFF, there's always the question, is it a CID font? If so, we shall use the CFF car set to do the actual mapping. It is again another kind of built-in encoding. If it doesn't have any kind of CID operators, which are some generic ones, the CID will be directly the glyph index. So no further mapping required, just go for the glyph. Now, for TrueType, my favorite. We have character codings. Character codes we map to CIDs using the encoding CMAP. That's already known. And then we use the CID to glyph index using the CID to GID map. That means we use the incoming CID codes and map those to something, to a glyph ID. One common way of doing this is using the identity encoding. That means any CID is the actual glyph ID in the font, but there can be custom ones. And again, as it is always with TrueType, the conforming reader shall select glyphs by translating characters from the encoding specified by the predefined CMAP to one of the encodings in the TrueType font's CMAP table. And I love this sentence. The means by which this is accomplished are implementation dependent. I'd like to shoot that one who's written that down. Well, one possibility to solve that thing is to load the appropriate UCS2 CMAP. Map all those CIDs into the UCS2 space, and from there on, go back to glyph IDs using the Microsoft Unicode subtable, CMAP subtable. This is one possible way. It has been proven, for us at least, but it is working in many cases. Not in all, I must admit, but in many. Good. I have to fast pace here a little bit. Extracting text is quite associated with what we have when it comes to glyph selection. And really, glyph selection is identical to text extraction. Does anyone agree with me? You better do not, because it's not. It's a totally distinguished concept, because glyph selection can be quite specific for the kind of font that you actually have embedded. For, most often, you'll see fonts to be embedded as a so-called subset. That means that they only have a small set of glyphs, the small set that is actually used. And the encoding is typically completely broken. So how do we do Unicode character code lookup? We have the character codes, again, just our raw bytes. And in the case of simple font, we're using the base encoding again. So we map to a name, and then we map back to Unicode using the Adobe glyph list. This is something we have already done in some cases for the TrueType encoding. And for complex fonts, we have typically a mapping from character codes to CIDs. And there's always, or needs to be, a CMAP which maps CIDs to Unicode. And as an example for how this is being accomplished, we have the so-called CID system info within the descendant font. And it includes a registry and an ordering. Those both can be used to use one of those predefined UCS2 mapping tables, which map to UCS2, which is almost identical to UTF-16. And for all those other characters, there are some smaller workarounds, but in most cases, that is already enough. And I'm pretty sure I'm arrived on time. And I thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, please go ahead and ask me. Go ahead.
How do you handle situations where somebody, I'm talking about a library vendor, has developed their output where they're using a 2 Unicode table, but the character mappings are nowhere near any sort of earthly designed encoding table?
How do we handle that?
Other than firing them as a provider, I mean.
So this is something personal for me and the way our company works. We know that it's pretty hard, especially for people using libraries and expecting that library to do everything right, even if you're using it completely wrong. Mm-hmm. We're trying to search for that problem, right. Possibly within the implementation of the companies using that library.
Right.
And typically the only way is to either check the implementation, get in touch with persons responsible for implementing the implementation of the using code, and as a last resort, or probably also joined side by side, try to get with the vendor, in touch with the vendor of the library, to just early check whether it is a bug in the library. Is most often it isn't. Right. And if it isn't a bug in the library, what our customer needs to fix so that their documents are not completely messed up.
Right.
Beside of that, we have some heuristics for some situations. A little bit kind of magic. It works sometimes, as it does for the reader, as it does for all other PDF readers. Yeah, this is the best thing we actually can do.
Yeah, some of the libraries are, the vendors are here, so I don't want to name names publicly. And then some of them are some of the FOSS implementers, Apache. Some of the stuff out of Apache tends to be rather problematic. Apache FOP, with the XSLFO translation.
Sure.
And you're using TrueType fonts, they can tend to be bang head on desk sort of output.
Yeah, I know what you're speaking about.
Okay. It's just something that probably should be tightened down and addressed in PDF 2.0.
Well, at least in PDF 2.0 there are a lot of areas where the specification has been clarified a lot.
Okay.
So it is becoming much better.
All right.
But it's not going to solve the general problem. The general problem, in my opinion, is that all that fun stuff is pretty complicated. Mm-hmm. And reading through the specification, I have to go off. Reading through the specification and really understanding what you're supposed to do is not that easy.
Yes, I agree with you.
So it is going to be better, but if we would, in the perfect world, anyone that is going to do any kind of PDF writing software or reading software should be logged into a room with a PDF specification and a adjacent test if they have really understood what's in my document. That's the only solution that would probably fix our world, but unfortunately we cannot force people to be locked into rooms. So I'm sorry, but I have to head off for the other room. I thank you very much for your attention. And no one is sleeping. Thank you very much.